Good evening, but this is the last session, which is very important because we are going to devote it to military topics, strategic, operational military topics, and for that purpose we've invited Major General Miki Edelstein, and he's a rare combination. I've known him for many years, a rare combination of the following things. First of all, a very brave, courageous soldier. He has a very good reputation in the military, much admired commander. Today we need to state that. In the past I thought it was needless to say he's a very honest, decent, reliable man. I believe every word he says. In addition to his experience in battle and the strategic military thinking, he was also an IDF military attaché. He has had various capacities, but he was military attaché to the US, which gives him an amazing perspective of an understanding of the security reality. And today he is the executive vice president of Elbit Systems. It's an amazing company. Miki Federman, who is also sitting here. Yes, he deserves our applause. I encourage you to applaud him. And whenever I look for some rays of light in the reality, in our reality, then the security, the defense industries are a ray of light of creative thinking and hope for the future. Now, Miki, I don't know how he does it. He does active reserve duty, and he's also in Elbit. And Elbit, they've worked really hard in Gaza, and there's this attempt, he has a vast, comprehensive experience. I didn't list all of his previous positions because I want to leave some time for him to speak, and I'd like to talk about the lessons from the perspective of the IDF, and I'm not talking about, for example, the civilian future of Gaza. Let's set that aside. I'm talking about military lessons, also from the war in the Ukraine, because he comes from the defense industries, and Elbit is a main pillar of this industry, so they've also been involved in that warfare. I don't want to say Major General in reserves because you are constantly in active service, so technically you can get some money from the National Insurance Institute, and we're not going to talk about the military stuff that he's done because that belongs to the IDF. So hello there and good evening, and let's now focus on the integrated lessons that I know that you work on so hard. These are extremely important military lessons, strategic lessons, the war in the Ukraine. Please. Okay, good evening everyone. Good evening, Amos, who you were my teacher and a true friend. As we look at the campaign Israel is currently involved in, and of course it's not just the campaign in Gaza, and I'll refer to that as well, I'd like to look at things from three angles, three directions which impact the way in which we should look, and I think that the IDF does a good job in how it analyzes things, and so does the Ministry of Defense in the way they are looking and examining the current era, the current period, and how they look ahead. And there are a lot of challenges. And let's first begin with the current war, the current campaign. On October 7th, October 7th started with a surprise attack from Gaza, an unprecedented attack since the establishment of the State of Israel, a murderous attack with over 1,500 fatalities, over 250 hostages. Some of them, 120 of them, are still being held in Gaza, and we must bring them back. And other things that had an impact, and especially I think that this entire thing impacted Israel's strategic thinking. And alongside that, I would also like to say that when looking at Gaza, one of the things that my peers or colleagues in the US and Europe are astounded by, the speedy recovery of the IDF, which is unparalleled in general, to reconquer the territory, doing a maneuver which is perhaps the most complicated possible maneuver. But it's not only that. There is another campaign going on in the north, which is its intensity fluctuates, and it challenges us with our capabilities. And the third thing, this is the first time that we're fighting a war with an enemy that we don't have a shared border. It's not exactly the first time because we also had Iraq in the past, but this is a war, this is a campaign, and it's not just that night or the dawn of April 14th, but it's the use of proxies such as the Houthis in Yemen and others. So it's a campaign campaign that is held in several arenas. It is multidimensional. It's challenging the capabilities of the IDF. And when we talk about force design later, I think it brings us to a point where there are certain gaps we need to learn from and to prepare for, and I'm going to address these later. Another aspect as we look ahead is the perspective that we need to see what's going on in the world. For the first time in over 50 years, we are in an era of very significant systems or campaigns or wars. One of the most significant wars is the war between Ukraine or Russia, or actually it's a campaign between Russia and the Western world, and Ukraine just found itself in that position, and we see that that they're facing a superpower that's engaged in accelerated force design during the war, and it's a great source of concern for the whole world. And there's another campaign going on between China and the US. It's silent, but it's very, very powerful with respect to the capabilities that they're utilizing, but also in the aspects of force buildup. And I'm mentioning all that because the aggregation of all of them together, it means that sooner or later we're going to encounter these things here. And we've seen how quickly the abilities go from here to there. For example, the Iranian capabilities that went from Iran to Russia, but also we can encounter these capabilities because of the cooperation between Iran and Russia and how that can significantly threaten us. So we've taken these two things. But before I talk about force design or force buildup, I'd like to mention one realization following the past 8 months. And, you know, in the past we talked about, when we would talk about Israel's security conception, we would always ask, what can Israel or what does Israel do on its own? But now we've learned and internalized the importance of strategic alliances. One is with the US, which has stood beside us throughout this campaign with a huge and significant contribution, with an emphasis on the understanding that we have some long-standing, long-range campaigns. And another thing is that potential that came up from this campaign when we consider a regional alliance, because what happened at the dawn of April 14th is a powerful example that shows how much Israel can benefit from it. And I'd like to say that I think that Iran never imagined that it will constitute a significant loss, because now all the countries will understand how much they need to join forces in order to deal better with the threat posed by Iran. So it's an asset, and we need to know how to fully tap into this asset and utilize it. And now I'd like to talk about lessons in force design. We don't have enough time to go over everything, but first of all, let's talk about our insights after 50 years, you know, after the 73 war and after the Six-Day War, our insights regarding force buildup. We were a test case after the 73 war that the entire world learned from. And after the war, the Americans sat here for 18 months to study our war, and then they started to think how they will do their force buildup. And there are 3 points in time, or 3 steps in force design. First of all, let's talk about the existing capabilities, and let's see how we can maximally utilize them. I already said that this is the first digital war, and this is something that wasn't part of the Russia-Ukraine war, but this is something we are encountering optimally, and I can tell you this and share this with you. I see this in the field, the way the IDF is fighting. Before technology and anything else, the spirit of the commanders, all the way from the tactical levels to the operational levels, are exceptional, with an amazing learning curve, a very impressive learning curve. And yet we must also notice our ability to utilize the entire IDF in a way that we hadn't operated it before, and the flexibility achieved in the maneuver, in the cooperation between fire and the ground maneuvering force and the intel and the air force, that's gained a reputation education worldwide. Officers have come to learn this from us, and let me tell you in parentheses that because of the Tzayat system provided by Elbit, we are involved in that. You see it in every cockpit and in every APC, so that's the improvement of the skills, and there are other such skills that were acquired in other areas, and I'll talk about that. Another thing is the expansion of the existing ORBAC. We see to what extent the IDF needs additional ORBAC. The challenges which currently exist, we are dealing with a multi-arena war, but we are imposing restrictions on ourselves because of the size of the IDF. We could decide to do both, but then the achievements will be limited. I think that the decision to focus on Gaza is right. They reached the right decisions, but the Northern Front, if we want to discuss that as well, and if we want to talk about preparedness for the future, we have to expand and grow the IDF, and I think these decisions have been reached. And the question is, how do we build things forward? And we've also discussed this in the past as well. We know how to draw good lessons. The question is, how do we implement? And I'd like to mention two significant things. One is the sustainable capability. For example, in '73, we built a military, but over time, we couldn't sustain it. The Israeli economy couldn't finance it because ultimately the IDF is not the goal, but a means. And it is a condition to see our society thrive, the IDF, but it's not a goal. And we also need to see what are the existing potentials. And I'm talking about three significant challenges that need to be taken into account. The first one is that the State of Israel is a country with borders, highly challenging borders. The borders are challenged really on the border itself. We saw that with the Gaza Strip, and we see that in Lebanon, and we see that in the learning race, we are challenged in other borders, given the instability in other countries. This is why we need borders that are strong, powerful, with sufficient defense, even in a surprise attack. Because what actually happened on October 7th is that three principles out of the four principles that are part of our security conceptions did not exist. They're not deterrence, because deterrence you check on the following day, and we weren't focused on improving our deterrence. There was no early warning, and that's the entire point of departure for October 7th. And the third point is that our defense collapsed. So we need to allow for borders in a certain situation that would allow us to withstand these surprises at any given moment. And the defense industries, Elbit has its own share, the ability to provide borders with sufficient defense in any situation, in any scenario, in such a way that it would even make it easier for the Israeli economy when we look at things long-term, and that means sufficient firepower. I believe that here we have a very important principle. We don't need to tailor specific solutions for a given challenge. We need to come up with solutions that are good both for the defensive and offensive. For example, rockets and missiles. So that's one thing. Another thing, the State of Israel cannot afford for the rocket and missile threat to continue, not the long range, not the short range, and not even the missiles from Iran. And they've studied us, and there were some significant success on the morning of April 14th. But alongside that, I'd like to also add a perspective on future technologies. That night, it cost over $1 billion. That's a lot of money. We need solutions. We talked about affordability for the Israeli economy. In this context, we need to find solutions which would be offensive against the enemy, and also third circle, but to also find defensive solutions that are based on emerging technologies, for example, energy weapons that allow us to find better solutions at any point, at every time, and not to be engaged in wars, and it makes it futile and perhaps could even change for the better a long-term investment made by the enemy over time. But we need to come knowing that the State of Israel is not penetrable, not from the ground, not for missiles, and not for drones, UAVs, and everything else that was used in both in Gaza and is also used in the north today, in low altitude. And we should also examine the maneuver, and I'd like to say we were involved in numerous discussions in the past. Is the maneuver still needed? Will it be needed? The State of Israel, as part of the rehabilitation of its strategic stature, it started to do that with the maneuver in Gaza, but it needs to make sure that the enemy also believes this, that based on our capabilities, we need to show that we're capable of maneuvering wherever necessary, whether it's Lebanon or anywhere else, looking decades ahead. We live in an environment which is unstable. We've seen countries rise and fall. For example, Syria in 15 years, what has happened there and what's been created there. And in order to allow our country to thrive and to have security, we need to create a situation that the IDF can, and the IDF, people should know that we are impenetrable, but we can also get rid of every threat wherever necessary, and for that we need to bring capabilities and technological development that would enable that. We know in Gaza that we're dealing with the underground and the above the ground, and we're dealing with some very complex situations, and I think that here the defense industries, Elbit in its fields and others, we need to provide the State of Israel with security. The defense industries you've described, as you always do so well. You gave us a comprehensive strategic description. We talked about regional alliances, the U.S., the alliances with the Arab countries that in the past we could only dream about, but there is something very interesting that the outcomes of the defense industries can change the strategic situation, or where they don't manage to when we face this difficulty in the north. So could you maybe take an example? What I'm thinking of is the laser weapons. Some of it has been made known to the public. What hasn't, of course, we're not going to discuss. Can you say, because laser weapons, you know, when I was young, we would read Jules Verne. It seemed it was rich with imagination, but it wasn't realistic. Today, his imagination doesn't come close to reality. So let's take laser weapons. And in comparison to Iron Dome, which requires a huge security budgets, it has low cost and a great efficiency. Maybe there are pros and cons. Could you give that as an example so that our audience here will understand to what extent the defense industries are part of our strategic fabric? Look, first of all, I beg to differ. I'd like to say that the defense industries benefit from the scientific and intellectual capital of the State of Israel. Without this population, we wouldn't have been where we're at. I'd like to share that. Let me give you this from the perspective of Elbit. Over $20 billion of a backlog for the next 3 years. This is unprecedented. This is tremendous growth. But it's all thanks to our employees. We were very proud when we had over 2,000 of our employees doing reserve duty, and still we have over 1,000 reservists, and I think it's a great point of credit to the industries that are involved, not just in the force design, but their manpower, their personnel are also in battle, and unfortunately, we also have casualties and fatalities. Now, as for the laser weapons, What does this weapon know to do? What can it do? We're facing a challenge, but I think we've overcome a significant technological hurdle. I think that we'll see the Elbit laser capabilities integrated into other capacities together with Rafael, but we've said that we can take this instrument to the air and actually address different altitudes. I can't really get into the specifics from the different circles that threaten the State of Israel. And as we look ahead, and we do so with the research and division, the research and development division, and our preparedness for different scenarios will be much, much better, and will be able to protect us in a much, will be able to protect Israelis in a much more secure manner, because we are above the cloud, so there are less limitations. There are limitations and restrictions, but there are other complexities, and for that we have very good physicists who can deal with these matters, but we can deal with the residual threats in a way that will deter other countries to think about different strategic threats, and that will be a breakthrough. And I think that this will also maintain the State of Israel in the forefront of technology. That's one thing. There are many other things. Elbit has other things, other industries, other companies have other things, but in the context of Elbit, this is one of the instruments which we consider to be a significant potential for the State of Israel as we look ahead. So if we add up everything that we've discussed succinctly, think about a situation that the Iranians are saying, okay, we were stopped by Israel's military capabilities thanks to its regional alliance, but we think that in the future we can overpower them. So this kind of energy weapon, then maybe there will be even a better situation so that we can incorporate it. Absolutely. I always love how you know how to combine operations with strategy. I think this can lead us to a different regional position, even international position. The defense industries, I mentioned Elbit, but others, we do have certain gaps. Even in this campaign, it's important to say there are gaps, and we need to improve force protection during maneuver and the ability to deal with UAVs and drones. We can see the challenges in the north. Some of this is an outcome of priorities, and we did the decision-making together, the Ministry of Defense with us, but we'll know how to deal with them, with these threats over time. Some of the threats we'll treat sooner, and others we'll address later. But when we talk about countries in Europe and all these operational proof, this truly makes it possible for us to continue and develop things that are cutting edge in global technology. From a third-tier player, we're now a second-level player, and we are looking ahead. I'll tell you a bit about the past in order to explain what technological potential is. In '73, we started with the drones. The drones are today the workhorse of the Air Force. That's one example. And another leap that was made are the ability to hold the ground. Today, every division commander in Gaza has one drone that sees the entire territory of the division, and not just silos provided by smaller drones. And this is an amazing, tremendous leap that gives us technological flexibility in other arenas. So this is perceptions that can be flexible enough. You remember perhaps very well that the purpose of the drones was for a completely different objective, but we designed them in a way that they would also suit a strategic change, and where we need different operations, in this case facing highly advanced terror armies, but it could be later suitable for other scenarios. So from two perspectives, one of the IDF, which we're very familiar with to the highest levels, from the perspective of a leading defense the campaign between Russia and the West, Ukraine, that's merely the territory, just like Spain before World War II. But can you talk about 2 or 3 major things that have to do with force design? And now there's a ruling by the High Court of Justice about manpower, and there are the warning letters. Let's set aside the personal element, but the key point of criticism is on decision-making, flawed decision-making processes and force design processes. So based on these lessons, what would you mention? Of course, not to mention anything that's classified. Well, first of all, let me say I can't really elaborate here. I'm involved in some of these things, so I'm not involved I'm not part of the investigation conducted by the IDF, but they are doing a very serious process, both regarding use of force and also regarding force design, conducted by both the IDF and the Ministry of Defense. And what are we learning? Let me give you an example to one of the most significant lessons in the process. In the previous 5-year plan, we said that the intel will reach the end. And now we understand that the formations that occur in the battlefield during a maneuver require much greater capabilities and agility at the operational end, because they're the ones who experience it, and that means a different kind of posture. We cannot suffice with one type of fire that will only come from the air. We need tremendous flexibility for 2 reasons. Because of the impact on the battlefield, that's one thing. For example, today in Gaza, there is competition over time of exposure. Who exposes more quickly? That's not enough, but who closes the circle? That's the most important element. And if we add another level to that, to close it at the right place, at the right quality is in achieving the target, the required operational achievement, but you also need to consider collateral damage. This is how we operate as the IDF. So we need to combine this ability, this operational. It has to be much more agile and able to deal with things, and that's a significant change in comparison to the previous multi-year plan. And that has to do with different components of fire. In this respect, we need to give the IDF the flexibility to operate in every kind of weather, because we learn, because now in the summer, let's take Gaza, there are 2 or 3 days a week with fog, but for the enemy, our force at the end of the line meets them, and they need to be able to contend with the enemy, whether it's above the ground, beneath the ground, in an area with or without civilians, and we need to provide a broader range of options for the soldiers who are doing the operations. We'll bring the entire general staff, bring the general staff if there is early warning, but we don't always have enough time provided by early warning. So whether it's in the borders like the example I gave, we need to improve our position. So we need to be there during the maneuver. Of course, we could go on to continue until midnight, but we need to conclude soon. Maybe I'm deviating from our topics, but the defense industries, there's great appreciation from them all over the world, and that's manifest in our defense expert. It sounds like a boring name. Once a year, Sibat, the organization which helps export, they say export has risen to $13 billion. It used to be a 1-digit number. Let's set aside the revenues, but let's talk about our image, the impression we leave through the defense industries, including the place where you served, which is the U.S., which is a military superpower. Maybe you can give us some examples so that we'll finish on an encouraging, optimistic note. Even though most of the things that you said, if we will implement the lessons, then I feel encouraged that our power will grow. So in the global defense market, I'd like to share with you some of the challenges. I'm an optimistic person, but let's also share the challenges. The Eurosatory event is a very problematic one. Right now, like I said, we have a backlog of $20 billion, tremendous success for the defense industries in general, but we definitely need to pay attention to the option of things changing and transforming on two levels. First of all, with respect to sales, but also with respect to the supply chain. And I'd like to make one comment in this context. In the context of sales in general in the world, you can see the abilities of Israeli defense industries. Their abilities are proven, and there aren't that many who meet that. The abilities of different countries, they say, we sell, you can trust us, it works. And that unfortunately is related to our wars, and it has to do with the fact that people trust our capabilities, because you want to purchase an ability that you feel deep inside that you can trust. And European countries have chosen us to buy from us their rockets for a reason. This is an unprecedented breakthrough. We competed with the greatest giants in the world, and it's not because we're cheaper or anything like that. It's simply because we're better. The product we give is of great quality, and it's also very user-friendly. And the effect, ultimately what we look for in these things is an effect, but we need to be aware of the option that maybe there will be challenges to the state of Israel. I mentioned Eurosatory, and I think that the political establishment is very much aware of these issues, and it consults with and it assists the industries. But I'd like to make one comment about the supply chain. We encounter challenges, and I still don't know what the future holds for us in this context. There are countries that have been blocked. France, for example, blocked certain components in the supply chain, and there are other challenges in this context. There is a question that the industries, the Ministry of Defense needs to pay attention to. What are we going to manufacture independently here? No doubt that we don't need to manufacture everything, but on certain things we'll have to decide whether we manufacture these things, these products here. And the first company that Elbit was established from, I'm going back to the French, unfortunately, even though I have nothing personal against them, but it started from de Gaulle's French embargo, and then they needed electronic elements, components, and we'll have to ask ourselves, where do we demand independence? Our manpower is amazing. I talked about over 2,000 people who are in reserve duty. People who have been retired came to the assembly lines to work because people were in reserve in order to make sure that we manage to supply all the needs of the IDF. You can see on Saturdays, people work 7 days a week and 3 shifts. And in that context, we'll have to ask the questions: what do we want to have? Where do we want to have independence, so that we won't encounter now or in the future, as we look at future challenges? And maybe there are certain elements, certain components that we will want them to be manufactured here in Israel, and they will be used in other products as well. And I'd also like to say that the industries are a source of power. Let me say something about people. We see a lot of people swarming to the defense industries. It's not just because it's a good workplace, because the work there has a meaning. And I see friends, the children of my friends, young men and women who are looking for a job with meaning that will contribute to this country, and I think they're a source of pride for us as the Israeli society. I would like to thank Major General in Reserves, even though I think he's still a Major General, Miki Edelstein. You gave us a fascinating overview. I would just like to say one sentence, that this fascinating fascinating and excellent overview. That's always the case with you, and also with the place you're at today. That represents the main message of this conference. If we want strategic power, and we need it, it's first of all based on our integrated military power, you know, the IDF with the defense industries and everything else, and also strategic, political, diplomatic savvy. And what you talked about, stopping the Iranian attack, I'm sure that we're pleased, but maybe the other side is also pleased. It depends on whether they consider this to be a tactical event. Ultimately, it was stopped by our tremendous might and the strategic savvy of regional collaboration and an excellent relationship with the U.S. We're not provoking them or anything like that. This is we're at an intersection, and this is a high time for this interoperability that you talked about from the military perspective, and the message that should be conveyed from here, so that we do not continue on the path of strategic surprises, is that we will prepare for possible surprises, but the key is military power and strategic savvy and the combination between them. And with that, we hereby adjourn the 21st Herzliya conference, the 2024 Herzliya conference. Thank you very much, Miki. Thank you very much to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you, and I'd like to thank all the guests who have been here throughout the 2 days of the conference. I'd like to thank the organizers, and first and foremost, Amos Gilead and Elaziv and their team and the production team, and all those who have helped to organize this amazing conference. And I'd like to thank the Reichman University for the 21st conference, which is a trailblazing conference. And now you are all requested to rise as we sing the national anthem, Hatikva.